The title, of course, is the Water and Livelihoods Initiative that's taking place in the Middle East and North Africa. And my job is to introduce our panelists. And our discussion today is to reveal some of the lessons that we've learned over the past few years working with this project, and also to highlight a few new directions for the future. This project grew out of a discussion I had with my supervisor, John Wilson, about 5 years ago, when he suggested that what the Middle East needed was a project like the Africa Bureau had been running, such as the Initiative to End Hunger in Africa. And we found it was really quite a challenge because the Middle East is so geopolitically difficult to work in sometimes. Some of the countries are hard to go to. So I took that advice to heart and in fact separated from IFPRI in 2007 to move to the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Areas, where I worked with our first speaker, IFPRI's Director General Mahmoud Sola. He has many virtues, but the ones I really admire are his excellent judgment, his personal character, his experience, and his ability to work extremely hard. He's one of those people that was born to be a line manager, and he's been in top management roles at IFPRI and in FAO since I first met him in a computer lab in Morocco in 1988. Both of us were scientists at that time. So since then, we've shared a lot of good experiences, and he's a close friend of mine, so welcome, Mahmoud. I'm really happy to see you here. It took about a year to get the WLI concept launched at IFPRI, but by July of 2008, we invited a group of U.S. university representatives, including our second speaker. I believe it's Jim Hill, not Sandra. I can't remember which one's going to speak first, but I believe it's Sandra, or Jim. And Sandra's from the University of Florida, and Jim Hill's from the University of California at Davis. We convened a workshop called the Inception Workshop in Aleppo in July of 2008, and that's when we kicked off the project in its conceptual phase. So Sandra and I know each other for a long time. We went to school together at the University of Florida, but fortunately we don't have time to recount any of those anecdotes right now. Jim Hill and I got to know each other because he's been heavily involved in USAID, State Department, and USDA programming in Iraq. He's helped with the Iraq Agricultural Extension Revitalization Project. He's also heavily involved in Afghanistan at the current time. And last month, the two of us spent most of the month together, either in Egypt or working on a report concerning extension and advisory services in Upper Egypt. And that's he'll be talking about extension and advisory services during his presentation. So the goal of the Water and Livelihoods Initiative, I'm just going to give some background, is to improve agriculture and water productivity and rural livelihoods in the drylands of North Africa and the Middle East. The approach is a bottom-up one. We actually queried the national programs in each of the countries and approached ministries of agriculture and ministries of water and also universities in the Middle East. We have a very strong capacity building focus. It has 7 countries: Iraq, Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, West Bank, Gaza, and Egypt, and 3 agroecosystems: the rain-fed, rangeland, and irrigated agroecosystems, which you will hear about more. So here's a picture of the actual benchmark sites. We call them benchmark sites because they're replicable models for expansion to other areas that are similar in each country. But you can see how we divided the countries into 3 sets of agroecosystems. We have in the olive-colored circles the rain-fed sites in northern Lebanon, in Syria, in the Rab Valley, and also in northern Iraq. In the irrigated sites, there's a site in the delta of Egypt. There's one just west of Baghdad, and there's another one in Yemen. And for the rangeland sites, there's two locations in the eastern slopes of the West Bank and there's one in just east of the airport in Jordan. U.S. universities, of course, sought counterparts for work on education in the Middle East. Therefore, while the CGIAR centers, ICARDA, IMI, the International Water Management Institute, and IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, their job is to coordinate with the national agricultural research systems in each of these countries. But there's also a link to a hub university in each of the countries, or each in the agro-ecosystem. So the hubs, and Mahmoud is going to talk about this a little bit more. The rain-fed hub takes place at AUB, American University of Beirut in Lebanon. The rangeland one is located at the University of Jordan in Amman, and the irrigated benchmark, or the irrigated hub for universities, is at the American University in Cairo in Egypt. Now, while I talk about the events of 2009 and 10, I'm just going to put this slide up here to draw your attention to some key facts about the countries where we're working. I would point out that there's some really stark figures and horrendous values for some of the indicators here for Yemen. And you can see the countries across the top in the Middle East, and here is the U.S. as a source of comparison. But you'll see that there's some very, very amazing figures for Yemen, and it's unfortunate that I have to report to you that on May 27th, a group calling itself the Jihad attacked, looted, and at last account still occupy the Al-Quds research station where our Water and Livelihoods team bases their work. Everything was taken or destroyed, and even the window frames were taken out of the buildings. So it's a pretty dire situation in Yemen, and we'd like to consider this a formal appeal to help to all of our colleagues and other donor agencies, and even within the countries where we're working in the WLI. And that's one of the strengths of the Water and Livelihoods Initiative, is that we have colleagues from all over the Middle East that can help each other. And it's turned out that this array of Middle Eastern countries in teams across agro-ecosystems has been very valuable for Middle East cooperation. So during the last half of 2009, we continue to work forward in getting the necessary institutional support from the participating countries, Ministry of Agriculture and the water ministries in each country, plus key research institutes and universities. And during February 2010, we held the official kickoff meeting when we formally received some funds from the donor, USAID. And that effort continued through 2010, and we have worked on biophysical and socioeconomic baseline studies at each of the benchmark sites. So now in 2011, we're starting small-scale implementation to begin the implementation, and every country has a well-defined national program and for the work at their sites. So part of the lessons that I want to leave with you is that partially because there's no bilateral investment so far, we've been using our regional funds to fund the entire project. So that's not sustainable. And we therefore would like to move forward now with the bilateral investments. And that may require more discussions with our USAID missions in the region, but also with other donors. One of the things that I think that we can say is that we underestimated the planning needed in setting the stage for this multi-mission involvement. And sometimes the missions are also very busy, and they're dealing with emergencies such as what's happening in Yemen now, and the revolution that took place in Egypt, and so on. There's many different examples of this where the missions are very pressed to deal with these regional programs when they have so much going on bilaterally. I'd like to say that planning and education is a continuous process, and our mission representatives for USAID often are only in the countries for a couple of years at a time, so it's hard for them to maintain their attention for a project of this nature, which should run for a decade. And also the magnitude of the projects is quite different. We would like to have something on the order of $1 million a year for every country, whereas the USAID missions are often running big projects that are running for only 3 or 4 years. So now, we didn't have the forethought to prepare a platform like this to be ready for use in 2011 with the advent of the Arab Awakening, or the Arab Spring. We planned it because the Water and Livelihoods Initiative was responding to the needs of the countries where we were working. And now, serendipitous as it may seem, we now have a homegrown concept in every country. We have a well-planned project framework and an efforts ready for scaling up. So the purpose of today is to raise awareness. Starting this month and next, we're putting in place a summer student exchange program. And because of its more modest costs, rather than an MSc, full-blown MSc or PhD programs, this will enable us to build bridges between the American university people and their colleagues in the Middle East. That's both for professors and for students. And this is something that Sandra Russo will be talking about as soon as I depart the stage here. Another new direction will be addressed by Jim Hill of the University of California, Davis. He'll be speaking to the modernization of extension and advisory services. As I said, we just spent a big chunk of our time in Upper Egypt, which typifies the situation of lack of resources, no transportation, and very little information for extension people to deliver. We feel that the MEAS can help to rebuild the formal extension systems, or alternatively give a source of information to associations that can substitute for formal extension systems. And finally, the newest of our relations under the Water and Livelihoods Initiative is a colleague from the International Youth Foundation, Jack Boyson, who will be giving us some highlights about what they have been doing in the Middle East. As we know, and from the statistics that you can see on the slide in front of you, the median age for the population in the U.S. is 37 years old, but in the Middle East, half of the population is below 29 in Lebanon, 21 in Syria, 20 in Iraq, 18 in Yemen, 24 in Egypt, 22 in Jordan, and 21 in West Bank, Gaza. So he'll be talking about some of these dynamics and the need for jobs, as these tendencies are going to be prevalent in the Middle East, not just for today, but for decades to come. So now I will ask the speakers to come up one by one, and I hope that we'll have time for a fulsome discussion at the end of the presentation.